Dr. Mark Tomass from Harvard University. Thank you very much, Professor, for being with us. We spoke yesterday before the so-called Middle East peace plan was unveiled by President Donald Trump and his best friend, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Please tell me, what are your initial thoughts after seeing the map and the plan?
Nothing new that was suggested. We expected something like that. Since the second Intifada that took place many years ago, the Israeli plan was to quarantine the Palestinian areas and build walls around them and let them move from one place to another through checkpoints. What this plan does, instead of these checkpoints, it eases the movement through building bridges between these separate Palestinian enclaves. The motive for this plan can be explained by looking at the let's say Arab-Israeli conflict in its totality. The problem that the Israelis see in the future is that demographically they may become a minority within historical Palestine. That is, if this plan goes through, and the scenario is going to be the following. Let me just get back a little bit. If this scenario is supposed to provide some sort of solution to the ongoing problem between the Palestinians and the Israelis. However, the Israelis know that this plan is not going to be accepted by the Palestinians. So what are the alternatives? The alternatives would be is to force the quarantining of these areas and make it a bit easy for the Palestinians to move from one place to another. And the quarantining here is very important with respect to Israel, because they don't want to be overwhelmed by the Palestinian population. Because as you have said, and this has been new in the past 5 years, from the Israeli leaders, we are hearing constant emphasis about the Jewishness of Israel. Which is something we assume that it is implicit. We all know that it is a Jewish state. They call it a Jewish state, and we know it is a Jewish state. But what is the point of the re-emphasis on the Jewishness of the state? The emphasis is because they are feeling insecure. The Israelis are feeling insecure. They think that demographic-wise, if this situation continues, during a time when the Israeli objective is to take Palestine in its totality, then they are going to be at some point become a minority in Israel, and that is obviously not going to be accepted. So therefore, the Palestinian enclaves either have to be totally quarantined, and this plan it looks like they is intended to do so, or possibly ethnically cleanse the rest of the Palestinians from what is historically Palestine. This is not a far-fetched scenario, because many scholars, historians, Israeli historians have argued that Israel made a mistake in 1948 and 1967 by not ethnically cleansing the entire region that is within historical Palestine. In other words, it made a historical mistake to leave the Palestinians living there and only ethnically cleansed very smaller parts of the Palestinian villages and cities. So in other words, the scholars who are looking at it from a long-term perspective, they acknowledge that there is a problem that is waiting to take place sometime in the future, maybe 20, 30, 40, 50 years later. So I think this is what they have in mind, is that they propose this plan, which is totally unacceptable for the Palestinians. Because it is unacceptable, they may be hoping that there will be some sort of intifada, intifada meaning rebellion in Arabic, some sort of rebellion that will result in the ethnically cleansing of the Palestinians and throwing them into Jordan, which is the ideal solution that many Israelis have suggested and and Americans who are sympathized with the Israeli cause have suggested. So I think this is the intention of the plan, knowing that beforehand that it is going to be rejected by the Palestinians, and also not inviting them to negotiate with them this plan.
That happens. It should not be surprising for us, is it?
No, it's not surprising, because this is what this is what would make sense from an Israeli perspective. The question is, what is the smart thing for the Palestinians to do? Like, if you look historically from 1917 until now, the armed resistance that was carried out by various Palestinian factions didn't work. The project to establish Israel went ahead from 1917, since Britain promised the land of Palestine as a Jewish homeland. It continued until now. So all of this armed resistance actually backfired and had a negative impact on the rights of the Palestinians. I believe the smart thing to do, and that is history now, we cannot do anything about it. The smart thing to do is just to fight for human rights. The Palestinians should ask for equal citizenship within historical Palestine and not engage in any violent actions, because that's what Israelis at this point want. They would prefer that the Palestinians engage in rebellion, so that they would justify their eviction from historical Palestine into Jordan and maybe into the Sinai. So I think, and that's what I mean by we need identity reconstruction. Instead of Palestinians thinking of themselves as Palestinians and therefore they are entitled to a nation, that has not worked. And they have to realize that has not worked. The plan B is for them to ask for equal citizenship right. And I don't know why they are not pursuing that.
Now, Professor, an interesting question. Yesterday, right after the plan was unveiled by President Donald Trump, Trump's son-in-law and advisor, Jared Kushner, spoke to an international media outlet about the plan. During that interview, he kept saying that the Palestinian people have been used as pawns by certain groups, and that the Palestinians are living in some sort of a fairy tale. What do you think he meant by that?
What he meant was all of the Arab states that have acted or claim to be acting on behalf of the Palestinians, that they are not genuine. In other words, if you rewind back a little bit back, for example, Jamal Abdel Nasser, the president of Egypt, he was a champion of the Palestinian cause. In this context, Trump would mean that he was using the Palestinian cause for his own self-aggrandizement, for his own political purposes, for him to be popular in the Middle East. He didn't really care about the Palestinians. The same thing would go for the Syrian governments, for the successive Syrian governments, for the Iraqi governments, for all of the other forces that are asking for the restoration of the Palestinian rights, including at this time Turkey, for example, since the recent government for the past 10 years has been trying to act on behalf of the Palestinians, and more importantly also Iran. Iran actually not just trying to champion the Palestinian cause, but actually giving arms to Hamas, and the way the Israelis has interpreted the Iranian influence within Iraq and within Syria, that it is one way of coming close to the border with occupied Palestine, so that they would champion the cause of the Palestinians, and that's how they would lead the Muslim world. So that's what Trump means. Trump means that none of the Arab or non-Arab Muslim states that have claimed to be acting on behalf of the Palestinians, they actually don't mean it. They don't care about the plight of the Palestinians, and that's how the alternative that President Trump, and actually more, not President Trump is only the facade for it. The alternative that Israel is proposing is that we can go and solicit money from these Arab states, from Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, the Emirates, or maybe even Qatar, to bring in Arab money to invest in the West Bank, to invest in Gaza, to invest in Jordan, so that you would prosper, so that you will forget about nationhood and concentrate more on your livelihood. Now, again, the problem is that we don't know if any of that will happen. I think what the Palestinians should do at this point, according to the plan, that they have 4 years to wait and say whether they accept or reject the plan. The problem is whether they are going to see any of those 50 billion of investment between now and 4 years. If they will see that kind of investment, maybe their suffering will be alleviated. Maybe they will feel better, and maybe they will forget about their nationhood. That may work out, but we don't know. We don't know if all of this is real. In other words, if it is genuine or not. As I said, just by looking at the historical, the way historically this case has progressed, I don't see any positive outcome coming from it. The way I see it is that the plan is to ethnically cleanse historical Palestine from Palestinians and have the Palestinian state be erected in Jordan and the Sinai. For that reason, actually, if you listen to, I mean, there are two things one can say in this context. One is, if you listen to Benjamin Netanyahu's presentation yesterday, he was not referring to the West Bank. He was referring to Judea and Samaria, which is something I have many times have reiterated, that within Israel they don't acknowledge the West Bank anymore. In other words, they don't acknowledge the identity, the Palestinian identity anymore. That's why they call it Judea and Samaria. It's calling it with its biblical name. Second, what was important here, there was no reference to the Dome of the Rock or even Al-Aqsa Mosque. The reference was to the Temple Mount, right? The Temple Mount, historically speaking, the Israeli identity is based on its religious identity, that they are back there in Israel now to rebuild the third temple. So rebuild the third temple where? On this particular piece of land where Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock are built. So here you have to wonder what is being planned for that mosque and for the Dome of the Rock. Is it going to be destroyed? Is there going to be some sort of maybe a false flag operation that it would lead to its obliteration and therefore the rebuilding of the third temple there? From a secular perspective that I have, I don't know why the Israelis don't build their third temple somewhere else. Now, why do they have to build it in that particular location? I don't know how somebody who has a social science approach to things would accept this religious belief that it has to be there. Why do you have to build it there and insult the feelings of 1.5 billion Muslims? Why don't you build it somewhere next to it, somewhere close to it? Still build it in East Jerusalem if you want. But why do you have to claim this particular location as yours? I mean, is it really that big deal with the Almighty Creator of the universe that He wants you to build it right there? I mean, why don't you build it somewhere else?
Makes sense. Makes sense. Now, Professor, to your point about regarding Benjamin Netanyahu not mentioning the Al-Aqsa Mosque, I was listening to this speech, and I believe President Donald Trump did mention Al-Aqsa Mosque, although he mispronounced it. So do you think there's some sort of contradiction going on between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu as to what this plan actually wants to achieve?
It is possible that in the long run they have a different vision of what can happen to the Al-Aqsa Mosque. It is possible that Donald Trump does not predict, or he doesn't think that Israel has in mind to take over that real estate location to build a third temple. It's possible that he is not aware of it. So I don't really pay much attention to what Donald Trump says or he doesn't say. I mean, this is something he probably doesn't know what it is called. Al-Aqsa Mosque, as you said, he couldn't even pronounce it. So he may not even know what the difference is between the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque. So I wouldn't pay much attention to that. I would more pay attention to what what Benjamin Netanyahu and actually the majority of the Israelis are thinking about it.
Okay.
And yeah, I mean, there is one more thing I would like to mention.
Please go ahead.
If you look at if you actually look at the whole speech that was made by Donald Trump yesterday, most of the applause that was heard was regarding 3 points. One was the withdrawal from the nuclear deal with Iran. Second was the killing of Qasem Soleimani. And third was the moving of the embassy to Jerusalem. These were the 3 incidents where he got the most applause.
And I was coming to that, Professor, about the Iran nuclear deal. In fact, this was the first time President Donald Trump acknowledged the fact in public that he withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal because of Israel.
Yes, that's my point, and that's what you have to think about. Everybody who is analyzing the Middle East have to come with the truth. The truth is that the United States has no interest in the Middle East anymore. I mean, Donald Trump said that many times, and that was the basis of which he was elected, at least for those who elected him, because he was presenting himself as anti-imperialist. He was presenting himself as somebody who's going to concentrate on the United States. He was saying there is nothing there but death and sand. After saying all that, he claims, for example, he is in Syria because he wants to take the oil. The United States doesn't need any oil. He is not there to take the oil. That's another false reason. He is there because there is a plan to create another state in Iraq. First, to legitimize the Kurdish entity, legitimize it and transform it into an independent state. And second, to create the third state that has been in plan for a long time, even by the Democrats, is to create it in the Anbar region, all the way between the west of the Kurdish region, all the way down to the Syrian and Jordanian border. That state was supposed to be the buffer zone between Iran, Iraq, and Syria. So that is why he's there. That's why the American troops are there. Even American troops, if you speak to them, they don't know why they are there, because they're not fighting ISIS anymore. So when they were asked, what are you doing here, they didn't know. They are just waiting there in order to materialize that plan. So the United States, if you think about it as a country here in the Atlantic, between the Atlantic and the Pacific, has no reason to be in the Middle East if it's not for the security of Israel, or let's say the perceived threat that Israel feels coming from Iran. If it weren't for that, the United States has no business anymore to be in the Middle East. So that's the point. That's the point that I wanted to make. Actually, it's a public acknowledgement. Look, this is what I did, and I did it for you. So now it is your turn to give it back to me, to be supportive of me in my ordeal now with the Senate.
And I remember you said that
possibly with my re-election.
And I remember you said that when we spoke, when the United States withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal more than 1 year ago, and you said that it's primarily because of Israel. Now, Professor, coming back to this Middle East peace plan, it is clear that the Palestinians will not accept it. There are some countries which back this plan, for example, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Egypt, and of course there is opposition to this plan as well. So, is it a symbolic move by the President of the United States, or are we going to witness some action on ground in Palestine? Is something going to change after this announcement of the so-called Middle East peace plan?
Well, what they are hoping for is a rebellion, as I said. Look, we know what the Israelis want. Israelis want the entire region that historically we call Palestine. They want that to be Israel. The question is, how do you accomplish that? With a sizable Palestinian population living there, this means that they cannot have a democratic state. This is what I have been calling for from the beginning, that the Palestinians should ask for a democratic state, a state that does not discriminate among people based on their religion. Now, if they do that, then they feel that they would be losing the majority, and in a democratic system where they would lose majority, then they would lose the, let's say, the religious significance of Israel being a Jewish state. So they feel that's a threatening prospect. That's why they don't want. That's why they don't want. They don't like the plan of having people treated equally. That's why they want to quarantine these Palestinian areas, so that they will not have access to resources. Only Israel will have access to resources. So one way is to make the Palestinians' lives very difficult and maybe force them to peacefully migrate to Jordan or other places, or even to abroad. The second is to ferment possibly a rebellion, an intifada, and react to the intifada violently and ethnically cleanse the region. Now, a lot of bad things can happen in that process. I mean, there could be false flag operations. Maybe something really awful can happen, and they would blame the Palestinians for it, and they will say then, look, we cannot live with them, so something has to happen. I think, regarding the timing is really more about the elections. The timing is about the elections and about the trial, the impeachment trial. And of course, the problem that Benjamin Netanyahu is facing now with the Israeli courts. So that is the timing. But in terms of the long-term plans, it doesn't really matter whether it's Netanyahu who is leading or the other person who's leading, because the majority of the Israelis have in mind the plan that I just laid out. That's what people are thinking. They are afraid of the demographic problem. And the one solution to the demographic problem is to ethnically cleanse the region, either forcefully, as I said, or gradually through quarantining these areas, the Palestinian areas, and strangling them, and so that they would feel it's a better alternative for them to move to Jordan, where they will be more free to move, more free to live normally.
All right, Dr. Mark Tomass, unfortunately, we are running out of time. I have many more questions, but I do thank you for taking out the time to participate in today's program. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you.